Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour. I am one of your hosts, Jack Chambers-Ward, and we're back in the living room in Candour Studios with Mark Williams-Cook.
Hello, Jack.
Hello. We're back in our cozy little fireside chats.
Yeah, I've got my lumbar support.
Exactly.
Very comfy.
We're getting to the age now where we just need extra cushions to keep us sat here comfortably podcasting without our backs hurting.
For long enough.
It does get to that stage, I feel like we have to pick a nice chair to podcast in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fortunately, we won't just be talking about our favourite chairs. Don't worry, folks. We'll actually be talking about SEO stuff. We can do a little follow-up to stuff that we discussed last time we were here, last month. We were discussing the bits and pieces and details and stuff that you didn't get to cover in your Search Norwich talk, all about the data that the Also Ask team discovered. And we're basically going to talk about the consensus side of things. So I think there's been a bit of chatter online about maybe some misunderstanding, maybe some misconstruing and stuff like that. So hopefully we can clear the record and set the record straight for a lot of that stuff. And also there's been some recent chat about the value of tech SEO, which I know is something you are very passionate about, Mark, and you've spoken about many times before. So we'll clear up that as well. And if we get time, we'll cover a few bits and pieces that have been discussed recently as well. In the meantime, and before that, here's a word from our sponsors. Hey, Anu. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Jack. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Welcome to Search with Candour, by the way. But I know you from your PPC podcast, right? PPC Chat Roundup, and plenty of other amazing things you're doing. But if the folks don't know about PPC Chat Roundup, what is it about and what do you talk about on the show?
Of course, I'm really happy to talk about that. The PPC Chat Roundup is a podcast that has been going on for several years now. It was very much, for me, was something that I got involved in during our COVID years. You can kind of have like a BC, an AD, AC kind of timeline now. I really wanted to get involved with the community, and there was this fantastic PPC chat community online, first on Twitter, but we now mostly chat on Slack, coming together every week, every Tuesdays, to talk about our issues and how we're facing them. I decided to round that up, for people who who didn't catch up with it, who like to listen to a podcast and hear about how other people are, delving into the paid search world. It is very much PPC focused because that's why it's called PPC Chat Roundup. But we do also like talking about crossovers with SEO because we think, PPC is part of search, SEO is part of search. It's very much going to affect each other. So topics that's really is one of the topics that we've gone over as well. But we've also talked about things like ethics in PPC, getting into talking about at conferences, AI, using AI with our content creation, ad copy, all these different kind of things of very much the hands-on issues. And a lot of them are very much the advice that you're getting are from people from all over the world, who are experts in their fields for many years and usually who work with agencies, who are freelancers and people who have their own clients and are experts very much. They live and breathe paid search, and they do it every day, and they really are. There's very much a very generous sharing information, and so my podcast is bringing all that fantastic, generous sharing of knowledge out to you, to anyone who wants to listen.
Nice. And I hear you've got some pretty big plans for 2025, right?
Yes, I do. So as I touched upon, a lot of the people that are giving their fantastic advice are people who are either working for agencies or their own freelancers, or they have their own clients. So they very much live and breathe paid search and digital marketing. And they have clients to report to, or they work within an agency where everybody near them is also doing paid search. So I am planning on actually getting more of doing interviews in this coming year where I'm going to be talking to in-house paid search folks, people who actually deal with the finance team, people who deal with, the HR team, people who deal with, other teams, trying to really explain why that they need to put more money behind their paid search activity, their marketing activity. And so, I really want to get that amazing, that wholesome viewpoint for you guys, for you to see what paid search should look like from an agency point of view or like a freelance point of view compared to an in-house point of view as well. So we've got 12 speakers already lined up. It's going to be like monthly interviews that I'll be doing, and I'll be bringing that over to you guys.
Amazing. And where can people check out PPC Chat Roundup and all the amazing stuff you're doing with PPC Chat, PPC Live, all the cool things you're doing.
Of course. I mean, it's in terms of this landing page, it's under my personal brand, The Marketing Anu. So if you go to themarketinganu.com/podcast, that's where all the episodes live. But we also are on Spotify, on Apple, and yeah, anywhere that you can, listen to podcasts, even on Amazon, music. We spotted it there as well. So yeah, anywhere that you can listen to a podcast, you can find me on. And you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter as well, where I do a post about when every new episode comes out. So if you follow me on The Marketing Anu as well, on whether it's even like Twitter, but also even like Blue Sky and on LinkedIn and all the other places, you'll be able to find me talking about all the new episodes that are going to be coming out this year.
Amazing. Brilliant.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks for joining me, Annie. So let's kick things off, like I said, with the consensus score. As we briefly, I know you touched upon in your Search Norwich talk, and we briefly touched upon on last month's episode when we were discussing the bits and pieces of data that I think a lot of people are kind of mostly attracted to when it comes to the data that you discovered through the Also Asked Google endpoint data that we found. Where is it you've seen the kind of like discussion going? Is it kind of people misunderstanding it, people misconstruing it, or is it kind of everybody all over the place?
It's mainly been from, I guess, when people have summarized key points of the talk, or have then
are they just chucking it through AI and
off.
hoping for the best? Maybe.
Possibly. It's hard to tell nowadays. I got accused of writing one of my LinkedIn posts recently by AI.
I saw, yeah,
because of the amount of emojis that I used.
Handcrafted emojis.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like they just kind of really liven up those paragraphs.
Yeah,
and I can't, if they're relevant, it kind, I don't know, kind of helps.
We do that for core updates for our newsletter.
Yeah, I like it. I don't want AI to take that from me.
Yeah,
I mean, we've had to bin certain words like delve. Like you can't ever
you
say
can't deep
that
dive
now.
or delve or
No.
like that.
Anyway,
so let's deep dive into
I've
consensus.
already tangented off. So, yeah, I think the issue is actually to do with how people define words, because it sounds weird to say, but you need to be so careful with these terms, like because the misunderstanding I've seen essentially is that consensus equals trust.
Right. Yeah.
And I think this is one of the fascinating parts of SEO to discuss, which is even when people say, oh, this site should be ranking or this one shouldn't be ranking, those are very subjective, and you can't even sometimes get people to agree on what a good result is. Everyone's got their different opinions, right? And you just need to be really careful when you talk about these concepts of, say, trust and consensus, because they're not necessarily correlated in that in a specific query dependent way. So example, we have a YMYL query, medical query.
Sure.
It's a useful tool to know what the consensus is, because the consensus is likely to be the scientific medical consensus. Hopefully you would, at least as a society.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's a whole interesting conversation anyway, because I think those consensus are where they are because of the school and education system, and now we live in a slightly different environment where you can just say stuff and it goes viral.
I know I brought it up a couple of times on the show, but the era that we went through of the last 10 years of that questioning experts and is the consensus real and all that kind of stuff, like you're saying, hopefully medical consensus is true, but a lot of people start questioning that stuff. And I think when maybe that was part of that kind of reaction, even in the SEO community, when you hear the word consensus, you almost kind of want to be a bit contrarian and be like, well, I don't necessarily want to just follow along. We're not sheeple, to quote
Google puppet.
Idiots on the internet. But I think there's that almost like reaction towards that kind of wording. Like you said, finding definitions for words and how they can change in different circumstances, because we're specifically talking about data based around search queries, right? This is not just like the same thing as here is scientific consensus or medical consensus and stuff.
So consensus is a helpful tool in specific cases to indicate what a good result might be, because in a YMYL query, one of the defining factors of a good result is that it doesn't cause harm,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And it's a very good bet statistically, among other things, that if you show a result that is strongly correlated to the consensus, it is likely to be correct and therefore the least harm causing or least likely to cause harm. However, I would say the majority of searches are pretty subjective,
Yeah.
and consensus could be used in the opposite way intentionally. So if you Google, for instance, a political opinion query, it may be that there is a consensus on this is the thing people think or should think or what most people believe. But to have a good set of search results, a search engine might specifically say, okay, well, I am going to mix in 3 or 4 answers that are strongly in
Yeah.
agreement with the consensus, some that are neutral, and some that are against the consensus, because it is a healthy, good search page, and you are maybe serving the user that wants to read the around the edges.
And we've talked about confirmation bias. I know you and Sarah Picona were featured in the BBC talking about this, and I did an episode with Sarah a few months ago as well, talking about literally the words you use fundamentally changes what you see, despite maybe that not always being your intention. You can pick a political figure and say, oh, why are they a good president or a bad president? We always use Trump as an example, obviously. But the low-hanging fruit of it is Trump a bad president? And that also ties into a thing Google has talked about before when it comes to SERP diversity. And they tend to talk about it in terms of the diversity of domains. Otherwise, you would get all 10 on the first page is just the one thing that is, you search for running shoes and it's all Nike. I know running shoes is always the go-to example from every SEO, but there we go. And it would always just be like, oh, they've got the most links, they're the most authoritative site, so therefore it's just 10 of the same. And I think, like you said, there is an element of that mixing and matching and understanding that there isn't always a clear intent from the user. We talk about search intent a lot and how often that can be mixed as well. Whether somebody is trying to better understand something from one point of view or the other, there is that element of diversity in terms of the sources. So if you're searching, and maybe this even ties in, this is a whole other conversation about the personalization of SERPs and all that kind of stuff we're talking about. If your search history and all that kind of stuff, if it is personalizing to you and you know you lean towards the right side of politics and you're reading things like Breitbart and all the other kind of like American right-wing publications, would it serve more of those things to then further aid that confirmation bias? Whereas the consensus side of things, I think it's really interesting at seeing it from the other side where we're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or bringing in an extra element. And I think that is what a lot of us expect from SERPs, like a variety of opinions and ideas, obviously based on the query and all that kind of stuff. So that is something I feel like we always say this, like we're kind of used to the Google SERP at this point.
Yeah.
We're kind of aware of, you can roughly get an idea of what you're going to get when you search for things. And I totally agree. You can get that concept of, oh, there's a couple of things mixed in there to kind of balance out 7 out of these 10 results are saying one thing, but there's 2 or 3 that said, actually, maybe it's this thing instead. And do you think that's kind of almost based on that data that Google is kind of consciously making that decision to diversify those SERPs in those ways?
Query dependent. Yeah,
Yes,
I think especially with personalization, they have to be really careful, because you don't want to do what a lot of social platforms do and just put people in a bubble, because part of search is discovery. It's discovery. It's not just I just want to repeat the things that I believe. Although one of the things we brought up in the BBC article was, because Google does use the click interactions and the user data, the user interaction data, there is a that would reinforce obviously what people want to believe, because lots of people do research to prove themselves right, obviously, rather than to find the truth. And I'm guilty of it. A lot of people are. When you really believe something, you just Google a thing to try and be like, well, where's the fact that proves my point of view?
Yeah.
And you have to be quite disciplined to be like, okay, well, how can I search for this in a neutral way? And the click data would obviously reinforce when you're finding things that you agree. So I think all of those things are a challenge to Google. But the main thing I wanted to, I guess, clarify was it wouldn't be like an SEO takeaway for me that, okay, here's our content. We need to just make sure it aligns with the consensus. That is not.
We'll rank better if we agree with everyone else.
I mean, you'll get that really vanilla LLM answer to everything when you ask any spicy question. It's just like, well, there's many points of view to this, and then it just gives you some boring drab. And that's not what people want to read. They do read specific authors, specific editors, specific publications because they want that different point of view.
Yeah, and we talked about it when I know Begum and Yammer and Arnout were here just before Christmas. There was that matter of opinion, right? People want to hear people's opinions about things. We want to have that human element to it. Like you said, you get the bland kind of like, oh, I guess non-committal answer from an LLM that will, because it is pulling from existing language that we have used and existing articles and stuff like that, it's just going to come up with the stuff that already exists. I know
it should be good at consensus, but I think it gets guardrailed a lot as well. So it's always kind of like, just be, play it safe with the answer, which is a bit like, from a human point of view, it's a bit like, that's kind of boring.
Yeah. I think coming back around to that consensus side of things, I think a lot of people took those, the specific query categorizations and the data and stuff that the All-Stars team discovered was that, oh, it's a ranking factor. Therefore, higher this, it means I'm going to rank more.
Exactly.
And as you
I
said,
number
like,
better.
Exactly.
It's a real mentality.
Yeah. Like, obviously, there's the quality score, and I know we've had inquiries. I'm sure you've had millions more in DMs on LinkedIn of like, what's my site's quality score? Like, how does that work? Like, even not wanting to get into the details, just like, what is my number? Because, and I know we've talked about this before, and I know a lot of reviewers and critics talk about this before, that a lot of critics are now leaning away from assigning a number to a thing. I'm like, oh, this film's a 9 out of 10, or this video game's an 8 out of 10, because everybody just skips towards, oh, it's an 8, I'll play it, or oh, it's a 9, I'll probably watch that. Nobody reads the 1,500 words before that give the nuance of why it's an 8 out of 10 and not a 10 out of 10. We just want numbers and be like, okay, it's a 9, I'll probably play it. Oh yeah, well, I'm not going to play a 5. Why would I play a 5? But actually, maybe it's a 5 for me, but an 8 for you, because you and I have very different taste in video games and films and all kinds of stuff. So
very.
Everything is subjective in that way. And I think we always want to kind of get a number, be like, well, higher consensus score means good. Higher quality score means good. Therefore, rankings, number goes up, rankings go up, money goes up, positive numbers all around, right? Nothing is as simple as that.
The last thing I'd mention is that Google has kind of specifically said before they can't necessarily like fact check things.
That's a hot topic at the moment.
Yeah, and it makes sense, because if it's just kind of like there's a bunch of content on the web, the only sensible, well, probably not the only, but a sensible way to not fact check, but determine if it is likely to be a fact is consensus, right? So I can see why they use it. And again, like that's not something I would have in my head when I'm thinking about SEO, that Google will know this is correct or no, it's not correct. Which is also why sometimes, apart from a whole bunch of reasons, like startups with new ideas and new solutions and new product names take a while to get started in search, because it's just the thing where a search engine's like, huh? Like, I don't know this terminology.
I don't even know how to categorize this.
Yeah. So it's like a whole new thing. But that's why I wanted to leave it on consensus, I think.
I think that ties nicely into our next topic, when I know is something we've seen a lot of discussion on LinkedIn, and something we've talked about many times. Even, I think I mentioned it maybe in our first couple of episodes or so. You and I had a whole conversation about tech audits and prioritization and stuff like that. I know you and I have had many conversations about that in the Candour, like, client side of things. There's a definite conversation about the value of tech SEO and comparing that to content and links, and thinking of those as kind of like the 3 pillars that we still think of now in the key parts of SEO. I know I did an episode at the beginning of the year that was like, what's the value of links in 2025? Do you think people are kind of leaning away from the value of tech SEO? Is that a new thing? I feel like we have this conversation fairly regularly, right?
Well, I wanted to read this to you because this was a quote from Darren Shaw on LinkedIn.
Former guest of the show.
Former guest of the
Our
show.
most listened to and watched episode
Yes, lovely
ever.
chap.
Shout out to Darren. He's
Lots of
amazing for
respect
local
for
SEO
Darren.
stuff.
And it was actually his reply to some other post, and it interested me. So he said, this is a quote, "We have worked on hundreds of websites for small businesses, and 95% of them get zero value from technical SEO." And I saw that, and my first reaction is, he must be bad at technical SEO. And then I was like, no, it's Darren. He's probably knows what he's doing.
Yeah, Darren probably knows what he's talking about.
And he's obviously focused on small businesses, because I know Darren does a lot of local.
Yeah,
SEO
mostly what the guys do.
And I do actually agree with this, which I think would be maybe surprising to some people, because I talk a lot about SEO. So to say 95% of small businesses would see zero value from technical SEO, and the framing for that, I did a post about this as well on LinkedIn, which generated, it as it always does, some interesting discussions, was that I think the most helpful way to look at technical SEO is as an amplifier of what exists. So from a user value point of view, you're not really creating any value for the end user, arguably, through technical SEO. I mean, you could
unless
say,
you're a real nerd who's kind of like, oh yeah, this is really fast, or oh wow.
So I was going to say,
look at that
performance
transition.
maybe is like, you could argue, but again, I would say you're improving the value of what exists. You're improving the experience. So, again, I would say experience is an amplifier of value, but the value generally is, to use the bang term, the content, whether it's a video, images, text, podcast, that's the value, right? So the issue is, if you are a small business and you have a 6-page website and you're getting your 52 visitors a month and you do a technical SEO audit and you do some internal linking and you do some schema and stuff, even if you got a 10% uplift on that, it's 5 visitors a month.
Yeah.
Right? And that I wouldn't expect you to triple your traffic from doing technical SEO. Yes. Hashtag, it depends.
Unless something's fundamentally broken. That's where it comes
obviously,
in.
I had a few people say, unless something, it wasn't getting indexed. Yeah, of course, right? It's like talking about how to make a car faster and someone being like, well, not if you crash it into a tree. It's like, yeah, of course, not if you crash it into a tree. So assuming the site is crawlable and indexable, I think most technical SEO will have limited impact if you have little value on your site, and that might be content or even existing traffic.
Yeah.
So if you're getting 100,000 visitors a month, and then you get your 10% uplift, suddenly that's wow. You go to a site that big and you offer that kind of increase, that's you've paid for your audit in a month.
Why we talk so often about, going back to LinkedIn posts, people being like, we grew our traffic by 50%.
Yeah, 50% from what?
From what to what? Give me the numbers here. The classic, don't have your axes on the graph. Line go up, everything's fine.
You can always tell by the smoothness as well. When it's really jagged, the numbers are small. So, yeah, I do think small businesses sometimes get a little bit bushwhacked by this, if by default in the silver SEO package the first thing is a technical audit, because even with bigger clients, we'll look at the site first to see if they need a technical audit, and you can just hit go on a tool, and I know a tool isn't a technical audit, but you can tell a lot, when you get a report back and you see all the anchor text is descriptive and there's already schema and there's no server errors
is
or
everything
404s,
discoverable?
and,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's no spider traps, and everything's already ranking pretty well. You can say it's and I'm sure there's always something I can find for technical SEO, but whether it's actually worth doing or whether it's, if you've time will be finite, so whether it's worth doing that over something else is unlikely, right? So even in those cases,
I mentioned the prioritization we talk about so much when it comes to auditing, that impact versus investment, the time, the resources, whatever it is, whether you've got to pay your developers or spend more time researching and developing a new solution to this thing, whatever that resource is, how much of that correlates to the impact that that thing's going to make.
So the argument I saw some people making was, well, you should do your technical SEO anyway at the beginning to make sure nothing holds you back.
Mm.
It's like, fine. But in terms of how, if we had 12 months and we're like, who's going to make the most money? And you've got your 6-page website and you start with technical SEO and I start with content, I'm pretty sure you would make a better return starting with content because, yeah, even if you say, you got a 20% uplift from doing your technical SEO, right? If I'm getting content live in my first week, I'm getting 80% of what I could get from week 1.
Yeah.
On that article. And,
Yeah.
So even if it's 3 months of publishing, then I go back and then I get the extra 20%. Whereas you've delayed starting. So you've lost the 80%. So you get 20% from the beginning. And it doesn't make sense when you put it that way around. You can literally do the maths and work out which will get you in that time frame the most traffic.
Yeah. And I find you mentioned like, the silver package of SEO, like the classic one size fits all thing that I think a lot of agencies are guilty of. And I'm seeing it less and less. And obviously, I'm in my little bubble of people I know and trust and stuff, which kind of helps. But I still occasionally will bump into on day 1, we do this thing for your website. It's like, okay, does that not depend on, we've had conversations with clients of like, yeah, we've got an internal development team. We're really good. We know what we're doing. Don't worry about it. It's like, cool. Yeah, we did a crawl as a check. Everything seems fine. Don't worry about it. Let's go straight into building links and digital PR. Let's go straight into content. And also analysis of the industry as well, right? Coming around to what Darren's often talking about with local SEO stuff, like how much do your competitors build links with PR? Does that matter in your space against your other competitors in similar industries? We've had conversations like one of the clients I work on is we're all content based pretty much. Like what is done with the technical stuff. There's not really much anything, what's the phrase? It's like picking at nothing basically at that point of you've already done the main bits. It's all kind of working as well as it can. And then should we build links? And I know I had a conversation with Tabby, our head of search, and we're like, well, none of the competitors have a significant number of quality links compared to our site. So no, that doesn't seem to be the deciding factor in this industry. Let's stick with the content strategy. And I think a lot of people take that, like you said, as just well, you need to do tech first, and then you do a content audit, and then you do this. And it's like a real step-by-step plan, regardless of the size of the site, the client, their experience, their onboarding, their internal team, the industry. There's so many factors that go into that where I feel like one size fits all is kind of pretty outdated at this point, I would hope. Fingers crossed, viewers and listeners.
Someone there's like,
uh-oh.
Yeah. So, I think that's, again, really interesting nuance in SEO, which is this whole value creation, value amplification, and what you would be doing if SEO didn't exist is sometimes the first things to work on.
Yeah, I know you've got the graph that is that it crosses in the middle where it's
that always causes arguments, and someone always draws links at the top.
Yes, there's links across the top.
Which is fair, but
yeah. There's as the site gets bigger, again, the tech SEO essentially the value becomes bigger as well, right? Because we often talk about this. I know I covered this with Patrick Hathaway before. I've covered it many times when we get into the technical things. There's something I'll be talking about with Sam Torres and Tori Gray in a few weeks as well. Templates of pages make such a big difference. And again, I know it's a conversation you and I have had before when it comes to clients as well. Say you've got a client, and we've got a couple of examples recently where it's millions and millions of pages, but it's an e-commerce site. It's okay, how many different product pages, how many different category pages, how many content pages, homepage, maybe some internal company pages. That's 5 or 6 different things across 20 million pages. You probably don't need to crawl all 20 million to get an idea of, are there any spider traps? Are there any serious indexing issues? Oh, there's a consistent problem with all of the product pages. For example, again, I had a client a couple of years ago. It was another e-commerce client where the CMS would build the categories on top of each other infinitely, creating a spider trap because they used relative URLs, not absolute URLs in the structure. So it's just it's just going to build a relative URL /category /product /category / over and over and over again. Yeah, that kind of matters. That's quite a big deal. That's pretty important. But you can notice that from your first category page.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I remember leaving my laptop crawling. I think I left it on overnight because I was like, I'm not going to check it yet. I'm just going to leave it going. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is a fairly small site.
Yeah.
They're like a UK
The
based.
crawl's 120 gig.
Yeah. Like I was looking at the project file from Screaming Frog, and I was like, that is big, and the number just keeps going up and up and up and up. And I'm like, I'm almost certain they have like a few hundred products
Yeah.
at most. And it's stuff like that at a glance. Like you said, you run a Sight Bulb or a Screaming Frog or your crawl
Yeah.
of choice, whatever it is, and get an idea of it rather than a full. Oh, I have to crawl every.
I mean, that would be one of
page.
the examples where you're like, okay, then there's immediate value there.
Yeah.
So I guess that crawling indexing would be that if there are crawling indexing issues, that's your big win. Apart from that, you just amplify.
Exactly. Yeah, because you can't create content if crawlers can't find it and users can't find it. If you've got a bad site structure or bad navigation, again, come around to experience and stuff like that. There is that real kind of deprecation of value, depreciation of time and effort involved in that. Like, again, auditing a site of millions of pages is much more time consuming than a local business with 6 pages, products, services, about us, done. I've worked on a lot of local stuff where it is literally, I mean, I changed it. I helped a friend of mine out. It was home, and then
home.
everything was on one page. It was just a
Nice.
single site, almost like I don't know, almost looked like a PDF. It was just like, here's all the services, here's all the things in one page. I'm like, maybe separate the services page out to like, oh, this is service 1 and service 2, because people search for
You've been
that
moonlighting.
specifically. Like, yeah, exactly. And speaking of depreciation, I think we'll wrap up with another little topic that I know former guest of the show, Will Critchlow, brought up and has again sparked heated discussions across the SEO industry, talking about when you stop doing SEO work and how much your traffic as a client, for example, will depreciate over time throughout the years. Will did a brilliant study on Search Pilot. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to go and check that out. And Will did a little webinar, there's slides, there's a full video and stuff explaining his process, which I think was really interesting. I think I was saying to you before we started recording, there seemed to be a fairly big split of like, well, duh, and then, wait, what? And there was a very
That's why I wanted to talk about it, because there is this big spectrum of different expectations. I mean, I've worked with a client, still tickles me, and it's literally been like 10 years. So I worked with a client that had a successful DIY store, and we did SEO for them, and they were super interested in SEO as well, which always helps. And they were sort of doing bits, and they were actually getting involved in the site development, for better or worse. And they did really well. I mean, in like a couple of years, we were like 5x, 6x their traffic, and they already had decent
from
traffic.
100 to 500.
Yeah, right. But no, he did well. And I remember I went to a meeting with him one day, and he was literally like, how do we know this wouldn't have just happened if it wasn't for SEO, right? You know, because we've been doing other marketing stuff. How do we know that we just wouldn't have grown if you know? And it's like, how do you prove a negative, right? It's like, I can't turn back time and do a split test. And at that time, you know, there was very little SEO kind of split testing going on. You just kind of chucked it all in what you think was right. And the interestingly as well, I had a friend of mine, Carl Hendy, who I think it was a few months ago, mentioned to me again. He said, SEOs don't get enough credit for stopping a decline, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really true, despite, you know, we're quite mature relatively as an industry now, you know, 20 odd years in, that, you know, it is just felt to be not acceptable. Like, we've taken on clients before that are almost in free fall, you know, because they come to you, they've tried everything internally, and they're like, ooh, help. And then you come up with a plan, and if you can stop that, and maybe you're running even, the expectation is, well, I want line up. And it's like, fully appreciate, obviously everyone wants growth, but I think there is an assumption of line staying flat equals nothing. Like, you don't need any work because I'm not growing.
That should just be the default,
that's
right?
And again, like, I think that's a natural that's a natural maybe thing to think because you look around,
Again, humans' relationship with numbers and stuff, right?
yeah,
Zero
like,
is the flat line across
you
the.
grow and then like you don't get any smaller, like
Well,
things. Well, yeah, maybe right
give
at
it
the
20
end.
or 30 years, mate.
But I can see kind of maybe why people
Yeah.
would think that. But um, I think about websites more as like an animal in an environment,
Okay.
and everyone's competing for resources, right? So if you just decide one day that actually you're not going to go and pick berries or whatever it is your animal does to get resources,
Sure.
if you just sit there and you're just expecting to kind of stay on the same level as everyone else, obviously that then you'd be like, well, no, I wouldn't expect
Yeah.
that. There is like this rising tide of competitors doing things.
Especially, like you said, because SEO practices are so widely adopted now. Granted, obviously, not everyone. Again, disclaimer, for all the clients out there, are like, what? Oh my God. But I think enough people are working with freelancers, working with agencies, aware of SEO as a concept. Whereas, like you said, take 10, 15, 20 years ago, I'm sure you having conversations with clients back then of like, so a search engine, right? Is
Yeah,
this
it's
thing, and
explain
so
what
like,
SEO was.
you have to fundamentally
Yeah.
explain that
Yeah.
thing. Whereas you have a client coming to you saying, oh, we're having
Yeah.
problems with our SEO. We've tried everything
Yeah.
internally, as you were just saying. You get the idea that they at least have a basic understanding of what that relates to them and their competitors and their industry and all that kind of stuff. Like I was saying just now with the competitor side of things, taking a broader kind of scope of or perspective of what the competitors are or aren't doing. Like you said, when you're a flat line but everyone else is going down, haha, you're winning that competition. Like it's the thing. I was again having a conversation with a client the other day where the entire industry is slowing down, for example, but you're still maintaining that traffic and still going. Sure, you're seeing some declines like year on year and stuff like that, but as a trend, as a long-term trend across multiple different competitors in the same space, they're all going down much faster than you are, or you're staying the same and they're going down. That's relative growth. You're still getting the same amount of berries. I'm trying to pull on your analogy here. You're still getting the same amount of traffic, but in the H is like the share of the pie. The share, we're building analogies upon analogies now. We've got animals picking berries to make pies. Who knows what's going on? But you're getting that bigger share of the pie, right? Because
Of the berry bush.
of the berry bush. Yeah, you're getting more berries from your bush. Exactly. You're getting 100,000 a month.
Let's
Whatever.
just kill that,
Yeah.
that analogy. It's not working
You're still getting
anymore.
100,000,
Yeah.
but the total interest in that industry, the
Yeah.
search volumes, the visitors in general is going down. That becomes a higher percentage of the total. I'm trying not to use the word pie. Total share of voice or whatever.
Yeah, share of search. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I think the one thing I always tell clients is when we're working in specific industries, like the people that are number one are not there by accident.
Yeah.
They're working to be there. And then I say to them, what do you think in best case scenario will happen when we overtake them and we get number one? Do you think, because the difference in traffic between number one and number two and number three is significant, do you think they're going to go, oh, well, that was really nice when we ranked number one for those things, but I guess we've been beaten. Pack your bags, everyone. Like, no, of course not. They'll have some kind of emergency meeting where we'll be like, well, we've been number one for 12
We've
months.
just seen this competitor show
Yeah.
up and outrank us.
And
Yeah.
now we're number two, so get the kitchen sink. We
Yeah.
need to get this back. And this is the slightly perverse thing about ranking well, which is that when you are at the top and you are making significantly more money than everyone below you, you can reinvest more. And that's the time to build your moat and make the, to use another analogy,
Oh, God.
if you're running a marathon, that's the time to put the distance between you and the second place,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because if you just ranked number one, if you just pip someone, the likelihood is from a algorithmic
Yeah.
metric point of view, like you're a few percentage points or decimal places like in a score above them, which means they don't have to do a lot to flick that back. Whereas if you are number one and you're ranking and then you're like, actually, okay, now we're going to double our effort, you can start to pull away. And there is, again, the self-fulfilling prophecy of if journalists, if customers are just Googling the thing and you're there, you're more likely to get the natural links and
Yeah.
the natural citations as long as you've got a good product and service that obviously people aren't actively using it and being like, well, this is rubbish, I'll go find someone else. Then you've got such a massive advantage. And again, I think that's the mistake that people can make, even if they work to be number one, which is like, cool, mission accomplished.
Yeah,
We're number
exactly.
one.
Tick,
Like,
next keyword. Like,
exactly. So, I mean, that's the time when I would increase what I'm doing more than ever if I want to keep it, because I'm going to reinvest the money. I can make the same profit as I was when I was number two and reinvest everything else in keeping and cementing that position. So it's excruciatingly painful for my competitor if they do ever want to catch up,
Yeah.
because I've been working so hard on digital PR. Everyone knows who they are. Our brand searches have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
Like, we've reinvested money making the product better, maybe, but reinvest that money to increase that. So yeah, I was definitely in the well duh camp. If you stop SEO, you can expect to see, I think Will said like 10,
Between 10 and
15%.
20% was
Year on year
Yeah.
decrease. Because there were some people, right, who were like, huh, really? I mean, did it surprise you? I'm guessing not.
No, I was a well there as well. I looked at it and I was, because I saw Will's post first that kind of summarized a lot of the bits and pieces. They're basically taking the graphs from the slides and all that kind of thing. I was like, why is this news? Why is this? What's this? Do we need a study on this? Is this really necessary? And like I said, credit to Will, he explains it in a really interesting way where, as we've just said, things aren't just in stasis on the internet. There is always competition. There is always battling for ranking and for revenue and for traffic and all this kind of stuff. And you don't just exist in your little bubble. You are constantly battling it out with every other competitor. Yep. Suddenly you said like, oh, a startup will show up out of nowhere. I had that with a client a couple of years ago. Like, I was on a client call with them and they were like, so this competitor's just shown up out of nowhere. Why? Where have they come from? I remember literally looking at what was going on and trying to find out, like, where have they come from? And this is where the whole Squishmallow discussion came from. We brought up many times, I think 2 years ago, a year ago on the podcast, and that became a bit of a running joke. We now have a Squishmallow in the office. And that was that whole thing of like, oh, they've really focused on this one thing that is apparently on trend at the moment. So their overall traffic is, absolutely huge, but it's on like 3 pages. The rest of their site is still basically nothing. Whereas we're spreading out across different product ranges. And like you said, not just focusing on that one little bit, you can really kind of get a broader scope of it and then worry about, okay, now we're at number one, now we're outranking these people. What's the next thing? It's like, keep investing in that, keep pushing that, and keep driving that. Like you said, that distance between first and second place can be an absolute difference maker when things like industries change, pandemics happen, financial crashes, all this kind of stuff that we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, whatever it is. When an industry starts crashing, but you're still so far ahead of everyone else, that might be the difference between survival and
for sure.
closing down your business, right?
Yep.
That can be an absolute difference maker when it comes to long-term strategies. And again,
you almost said game changer.
I did.
You almost used the AI words.
I tried not to deep dive into that game-changing idea. But yeah, I mean, I don't know much about business. Obviously, you know far more about running a business than I do. But that's definitely from my understanding is that kind of when you're at the top, you need to kind of be aware of everything that's going on around you and keep doing what's working. And I know there's a common phrase in a lot of the entertainment stuff is when number two is always talking about number one, but number one never talks about number two. Like, when you're on top, you don't worry about the other people, whereas everyone else is like, oh, we're gonna get you, we're gonna. It's a common thing in like pro wrestling and stuff like that, obviously, because everyone's just talking smack on everyone else.
So, hopefully it's been helpful for people, because I get when we talk about these things, when I post them, I get a lot of people actually giving feedback saying, oh, that's really helpful, you've explained it in that way, because I've been having trouble with my manager / boss / stakeholder to explain why we need a tech audit or to set expectations, or why not to stop SEO when we're number one, or maybe not getting them carried away with consensus. So hopefully that's
this is the episode
to
to send to your shareholders, stakeholders, bosses, C-suite managers, whatever it is.
So I feel like sometimes when we talk about news and things like that, we're giving like the color, and this has been the lines episode to draw around the lines. Like, this is how it all fits together. And I think that's a big part of SEO, right? Is being able to explain it to, because we again take it for granted. We're in the bubble of the industry, we know these things, they seem obvious to us, but
Yeah.
then outside, SEO is a little bit of a tick box activity. Well,
Yeah.
where are we ranking? We're number one, we're done. Can we stop spending now?
I joked the tick next keyword thing, but I've literally had that out loud before.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully that has helped some people.
Hopefully, even if you're not agency side, this is still helpful conversation for you to, like you said, have those kind of conversations and basically give that evidence. We're sharing our experiences with clients. Obviously, me over the last 5 or 6 years, Mark, 20 years of experience. Or that's a positive thing. Don't look
It's
like
a double-edged sword, Jack.
Sure, yeah. We weren't talking about how much our back hurts earlier as well. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Like I said, we do this every single month. Mark and I come back and we kind of cover whatever we want to cover.
Yeah.
It's nice and chill and kind of, whether that'll be news stuff, whether that'll be a topic we want to discuss, there's a particular thing we've seen on social media that needs discussing even more. We're going to kind of chat and hopefully give you some clarity, give you some ideas for the kind of conversations you could be having in your team, in the broader industry as well. And
if anyone else has got an idea, send it in.
Yeah, please do.
We can always take suggestions.
Absolutely. Leave it in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube. You can leave comments on Spotify now as well. You can just leave an extra comment in there. It used to be a Q&A process where you have to set a question of like, did you enjoy the episode? Now you can just scroll down and there's a little comments button there.
More helpful.
Yeah. Now you can just leave a comment in a similar way, because I think Spotify are very much moving towards the video side of things. Just becoming a bit more YouTube-y. So if you are listening on Spotify, watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments if you have any questions or any topics you want us to discuss in the future that you've seen. Oh, I saw Mark post about this, or I saw somebody else post a study about this. Let us know, because we're always looking for new things to cover in the newsletter, new thing to discuss on the podcast, and always interested in what's going on in the industry. So thank you so much for watching and listening. Thank you for joining me, Mark.
Always welcome, always a pleasure.
Always fun to sit here in the little Candour studio, have some fun discussions. And like I said, we'll be back with another one of these next month. In the meantime, I'm here every single week interviewing the best and brightest of the SEO world. I have, like I said, Sam Torres and Tori Gray. I've got Itamar Blauer coming up. I've got Danny Leitner coming up. That's just in February. So
star-studded.
Yeah. I've got off to a real star-studded start to the year, which is very exciting, and loads more plans going throughout the year as well. So stay tuned for those coming up in the next few weeks and months. And thank you very much for watching and listening.